There are seasons in life when it feels as if the world has quietly stepped back from you. You wake up, move through your routine, talk, smile, work, behave exactly as you should, and yet something is undeniably different. The laughter that once felt natural now feels forced. Conversations that used to comfort you now feel strangely hollow. The places where you once felt at home suddenly feel too small for the person you're becoming. And the part that hurts the most is realizing that no one sees it. No one notices how much you're holding together. No one understands how heavy your invisible battles are. No one comes close enough to say, "I know you're trying." You keep going, but you go alone. Eventually, a question begins to echo inside you. If no one sees my effort, does it still matter? Carl Jung believed that moments like this are not signs of failure but signs of transformation. He described them as the soul beginning to withdraw its energy from old identities, old roles, old attachments, so that a new, more authentic version of you can rise. This video is about that journey. Not the journey where you're lifted by praise, validation, or constant support. But the journey where everything becomes still, and you must decide who you are when no one is watching. We're going to explore 7 phases of rising in solitude. The subtle drift away from your old life. Learning to emotionally hold yourself. Releasing the language of the victim. Becoming your own source of recognition. Turning failure into a doorway, not a dead end. Acting from will instead of emotion. And finally, discovering that what you were searching for outside was always within. This isn't a motivational pep talk. It's a long, honest conversation with the deeper part of you, the one that has survived every version of your life so far. So if you're in a chapter where you feel misunderstood, unseen, or disconnected, stay with me. Not because I have all the answers, but because sometimes you just need someone to speak the words you haven't been able to articulate yet. Let's begin. The silent pull away, when who you were no longer fits who you're becoming. This stage rarely announces itself. Life doesn't explode. Relationships don't end dramatically. Your job doesn't fall apart. Everything appears normal on the outside. But underneath the surface, something fundamental begins to shift. You start drifting away from people you used to feel close to. You find yourself in familiar rooms feeling like a visitor. Your conversations become lighter on the outside and heavier on the inside. Nothing is wrong. And yet everything is changing. This is the first sign that your inner world is outgrowing the outer world you built around it. Jung called this the beginning of an inward descent, not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. A moment when your old persona, the one that helped you adapt and belong, begins to crack open because it can no longer contain the person you're becoming. This feeling often gets mistaken for loneliness. But it isn't physical loneliness. It's spiritual disconnection. It's the feeling of no longer recognizing yourself in the life you've built. Most people try to run from this stage. They bury themselves in work, seek new relationships, binge distractions, anything to silence the growing emptiness. But emptiness is not the enemy, it's the invitation. The truth is, the silent pull away is not a collapse. It's the beginning of separation from everything that can't grow with you. I remember someone once telling me that she started noticing she was smiling less in conversations she used to enjoy. She wasn't angry. She wasn't distant. She was simply absent. A small part of her was stepping outside the life she had outgrown. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. But it was the most real thing she had felt in years. She didn't force anything. She didn't fake excitement. She didn't cling to what no longer felt true. And slowly, she discovered something. She had not lost her world. She had simply stopped shrinking herself to stay inside it. Think of an oak tree in winter. It looks lifeless, bare branches, cold bark, no color. But the real work is happening underground. Its roots are digging deeper, anchoring themselves for the weight of future seasons. Humans experience a similar winter. It's uncomfortable, quiet, and isolating. But beneath that stillness, your roots are changing direction. You are preparing to grow in a way you never have before. The silent pull away is not punishment. It is preparation. One day, you'll look back and realize this was the moment you stopped belonging to the expectations of others and started belonging to yourself. If you're in that fog right now, between who you were and who you're becoming, trust that you're not falling apart. You're being called inward. And that call, however quiet, is the first step of rising. There comes a moment after the silent pull away when something even more difficult appears. You begin to realize that what exhausts you is not the lack of people, but the expectation that someone else should fill the spaces inside you. You may not say it out loud, but part of you still waits for someone to reassure you, to tell you that you matter, to promise they won't leave, to soothe the ache you carry in silence. And when no one does, it creates a deeper kind of restlessness. Carl Jung once wrote that loneliness does not come from being physically alone, but from the inability to share what matters most. That single sentence reveals a hard truth: you are not suffering because people aren't around. You're suffering because parts of you still believe someone else should rescue the feelings you have not learned to sit with. This is the doorway to the second stage of inner growth, learning to soothe yourself. It sounds simple, but it is one of the most transformative psychological shifts a person can make. Not because it removes pain, but because it removes dependence on the reactions, attention, or presence of others to feel stable within yourself. Think of all the moments you've waited for something outside you to calm the storm inside. A reply that never came. A conversation you replayed in your mind waiting for clarity. An apology that stayed missing. A hand on your shoulder that no one offered. When you rely on others for emotional stability, silence becomes a threat. Distance becomes a wound. Uncertainty becomes panic. It's not because you're weak. It's because your nervous system learned long ago that your feelings would only be validated when someone else acknowledged them. But that pattern is not destiny. It is only a storyline you outgrew. Jung spoke often about projection, the unconscious act of handing our unresolved needs to someone else and hoping they will fulfill them. The need for reassurance. The need for safety. The need for approval. When we hand these needs away, we unknowingly make other people responsible for our emotional survival. And when they fail to carry that responsibility, as they inevitably will, we feel abandoned. The truth is far more empowering. No one can carry those needs for you. They were always meant to return to your own hands. I once heard a story from a woman who described how she used to spiral every time someone she cared about went silent. Even a simple delayed message made her heart race. She knew it was irrational, yet she couldn't stop it. Only later, through therapy, did she realize her panic wasn't about the person. It was the echo of a childhood where she had been taught that unexpressed emotion simply didn't matter. When she finally learned to sit with her own anxiety, to breathe through it instead of escaping it, she discovered something surprising. The fear lost its grip. Silence became less threatening. Her worth no longer fluctuated based on someone else's availability. What changed wasn't the world. It was her relationship with herself. Self-soothing is not isolation. It is integration. It is the return of emotional authority to your own hands. Instead of reaching outward, you turn inward. You become the one who asks, "What am I feeling?" The one who answers, "I'm here with you." The one who offers safety, not through denial, but through presence. Emotionally independent people are not cold. They are consistent. They still love deeply. They still care genuinely. But the difference is they no longer collapse when someone else pulls away. They don't chase responses. They don't beg for reassurance. They don't lose their sense of self in someone else's silence. Why? Because they have learned to hold their own emotions with the same steadiness they once begged others for. Jung believed that this shift marks the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. It is the moment when the center of your emotional life moves from being external to being internal. You become less reactive, less dependent, less afraid of uncertainty. You begin to understand what real inner peace feels like, not the peace that comes from people behaving exactly as you wish, but the peace that comes from trusting your own ability to handle what you feel. And slowly, something beautiful happens. You stop demanding that others rescue you, because you no longer abandon yourself. A person who has learned to self-soothe becomes emotionally steady in a world that rarely offers consistency. They can sit alone in a cafe without discomfort. They can hear silence without panic. They can wait without spiraling. They can feel without drowning. They don't run from their emotions. They make room for them. And in doing so, they stop outsourcing their worth to the unpredictable reactions of other people. This stage will test you, but it will also free you. Because when you stop seeking emotional rescue, you become the anchor you once begged for. Not cold. Not distant. Simply whole. And that is the foundation upon which the rest of your rise will be built. After you begin learning to soothe yourself, another subtle challenge arrives, one that most people overlook. It doesn't come with drama, tears, or collapse. It arrives disguised as everyday language. Complaints. Small, casual, almost invisible sentences that seem harmless, yet quietly drain the life force within you. Complaining is the ego's favorite survival tool. It creates the illusion of movement without requiring any real change. It allows you to express frustration while keeping responsibility at arm's length. But at a psychological level, something far more dangerous is happening. Each complaint reinforces the belief that you are powerless. That you are at the mercy of circumstances. That something or someone else controls your life more than you do. Complaining is the vocabulary of the victim ego. It keeps you trapped in the story of, I can't, instead of, I will. Carl Jung described this dynamic as a shadow pattern, a way the unconscious keeps us small by convincing us that everything blocking our path is external. That life is unfair. That destiny is unchangeable. That other people are the villains in a story where we never hold the pen. But the truth is far simpler. The more you complain, the more you anchor yourself into a version of reality where you have no influence. Think about the sentences you hear daily. I'm exhausted. Nothing ever works for me. No one appreciates what I do. Everything is just too much. These statements feel strangely comforting because they require nothing from you. They ask for no responsibility, no decisions, no action. They are emotional placeholders, temporary relief that comes at the cost of long-term growth. The irony is this: complaining convinces you that you're expressing your pain, but in reality, you're repeating your powerlessness. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Complaints are the unconscious directing your life. They keep you focused on what's wrong instead of what can be changed. This doesn't mean that pain should be denied or minimized. On the contrary, awareness of pain is crucial for transformation. But awareness and complaint are not the same thing. Awareness says, this hurts. Complaint says, this is unfair. Awareness leads to action. Complaint delays it. There's a story I once heard about a man who lost his job unexpectedly. For months, he repeated the same sentence to friends: I didn't deserve this. Life is so unfair. His frustration was understandable, but the repetition kept him locked in the same emotional room. One day, a friend asked, if the entire world went silent today, no friends, no one to hear this, would you still keep telling this story? He paused. For the first time, he answered honestly. No. I guess I'm only saying it because someone is listening. That was the moment everything shifted. He realized his words weren't healing him, they were keeping him attached to the version of himself that had been hurt. Complaints keep you tied to the past. Action pulls you into the future. When people stop complaining, they begin reclaiming energy. It's almost as if the world around them changes, but in reality, they are the ones who finally awaken to what's possible. The power you unlock by dropping complaint isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet and internal. It sounds like this. I don't like this. What can I do? I'm hurting. What's the next step? I feel lost. What is one action I can take today? Nothing too big. Nothing too heroic. Just conscious choice over unconscious reaction. Once you embrace that shift, complaining feels foreign to you. Not because you've become emotionless, but because you begin to see how much energy it steals from your life. Anger can be transformed into clarity. Fear can evolve into direction. Pain can become instruction. But complaint turns all potential into stagnation. Imagine a river blocked by debris. The water doesn't disappear. It swirls, suffocates, and becomes trapped. Remove the blockage, just a single branch, and the water begins moving again. Stopping complaint is removing that branch. It frees your energy to move again. That is why those who rise in silence often become unstoppable. Not because they don't feel pain, but because they no longer let the pain become their identity. One simple shift. From, why me? To, what does this ask of me? From that moment on, you stop living as a victim of your story and begin writing the next chapter with intentionality. This is what Jung meant when he said, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And choosing begins when complaining ends. After complaint dissolves and action begins, another threshold appears, one that tests the core of your identity more than anything else. It's the stage when your effort is real, your discipline steady, your growth undeniable, yet no one seems to see it. There is no praise. No recognition. No applause. Only silence. This is where many people walk away from their path. Not because they lack strength, but because they were unknowingly relying on the world to confirm their worth. External validation is addictive. It feels warm, affirming, reassuring. But like all external sources, it can vanish without warning. And when it does, you are left face to face with a question that defines your evolution. Can I continue when no one is watching? Carl Jung once wrote, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Complete self-acceptance means this: you no longer depend on someone else to tell you who you are. At this stage, silence becomes uncomfortable because it forces you to look inward for confirmation instead of outward. Everything inside you wants to ask, does anyone care? Does anyone notice? Does what I do even matter? But the real question is different. Can I acknowledge my own effort without needing someone else to validate it? Most people collapse here, not because they are weak, but because the ego is addicted to being seen. The ego wants approval like it needs air. The self, however, the deeper, mature center Jung described, doesn't need witnesses. It acts because action expresses truth, not because someone is applauding. This is the stage where the inner shift becomes unmistakably visible. Before, you worked to be recognized. Now, you work to stay aligned. Before, praise energized you. Now, purpose does. Before, silence felt like rejection. Now, it feels like clarity. I once heard the story of a musician who wrote songs alone for years. He uploaded them online and received almost no views. No comments. No feedback. Just emptiness. One day he asked himself, would I still create if no one ever listened? After a long silence, he whispered, yes. Because this is who I am. That moment changed everything. He shifted from performing for the world to creating from the soul. 6 years later, his songs blew up unexpectedly. But by that time, he no longer needed validation because he had already lived through the years of silence that shaped him into someone unstoppable. This is the paradox. When you stop needing validation, you become someone worthy of it. When you stop chasing approval, your presence becomes magnetic. When you stop begging the world to see you, people begin to notice your depth without being asked. Jung described this transformation as integration. The moment when your inner worth no longer depends on the collective but emerges from within. Self-validation is not arrogance. It is emotional adulthood. It is the ability to hold yourself steady regardless of who claps or doesn't. A person who validates themselves can look in the mirror and say, "I did well today. I kept my promise. I'm proud of how far I've come." Even when no one else says it. In Jungian terms, this is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. You stop living through borrowed evaluations. You stop giving strangers the power to define your identity. You stop using outcomes as evidence of worthiness. You become your own witness. And when you do, something astonishing happens. Your energy shifts. Your posture changes. You begin to glow quietly from within. Not a loud glow, not a dramatic one, but a steady flame that doesn't flicker when others ignore you. That kind of inner stability cannot be taken away. Not by silence. Not by criticism. Not by neglect. The world may not applaud you today, but the world does not determine your value. Your commitment does. Your presence does. Your integrity does. And when you finally accept that your worth is not up for public vote, you rise in a way that is unmistakable. You become someone grounded, balanced, unshakable. External validation fades. Self-validation builds a foundation. A foundation strong enough to carry the life you are meant to create. Even after learning to validate yourself, life won't suddenly become smooth. Growth isn't linear, and the universe has a way of testing the parts of you that are still fragile. There will be moments when you stumble, moments when you fall into old habits, feel overwhelmed, or doubt everything you've built within yourself. This is the stage where most people interpret failure as a sign to stop. But in Jungian psychology, failure isn't an ending. It's an initiation. Jung believed that every collapse reveals an area of the psyche that has not yet been fully integrated. Every setback exposes a part of you that's still governed by fear, insecurity, or the shadow. This is not punishment. It is illumination, life showing you the next piece of yourself that requires attention. Failure becomes fire when you choose to understand it rather than fear it. There's a clear distinction here. A collapse you avoid becomes trauma. A collapse you face becomes transformation. Think of how often people hit a wall and say, "I thought I was over this," or "I should be stronger by now." But strength is not the absence of falling. Strength is the speed and honesty with which you rise. Everyone falls. Only the conscious rise with awareness. I once met an entrepreneur who lost everything in his first business. He told me, "What broke me wasn't the failure, it was the silence afterward. No one knew. No one cared. I felt invisible." For months, he replayed the same story of betrayal and loss. But one afternoon, a mentor asked him a single question that shifted his perspective. If this were the lesson you needed to learn before your next breakthrough, what would it be teaching you? He sat in silence for a long time before answering. That my intuition whispered long before the collapse, and I ignored it. What broke him wasn't the loss. It was realizing he had abandoned himself. From that moment on, he developed a practice. Every night he would write down the decisions he made and whether they aligned with his deeper truth. Not his fears. Not his ego. His truth. A year later, he began again, smaller, calmer, wiser. This time, everything took root. Not because he avoided mistakes, but because he learned from the fire instead of hiding from it. Jung once wrote, "Mistakes are the foundations of truth." Not because mistakes are desirable, but because they dissolve illusions. They show you where you were pretending, hoping, or denying. They reveal where your inner scaffolding is weak. When everything seems to fall apart, you are given a chance to rebuild. not from fear, but from clarity. This is where neuroscience and psychology meet. When you fail, your brain lights up the anterior cingulate cortex, the area responsible for noticing the gap between expectation and reality. If you respond with shame, the brain releases cortisol, and your motivation collapses. But when you take even the smallest step forward, a single action, a single adjustment, the prefrontal cortex activates and releases dopamine, the chemical of progress. Failure plus action equals strength. Failure plus avoidance equals stagnation. You don't rise by avoiding the fall. You rise by refusing to stay down. The phoenix in mythology doesn't rise despite the fire. It rises through it. The burning is what frees it from the shell that no longer fits. Humans are the same. Every time you rise without applause, without support, without someone catching you, the self grows stronger. The ego breaks. The shadow softens. The soul expands. Rise quickly, not because you're trying to prove something, but because the longer you stay down, the longer you remain in a story that is no longer true. Failure is not your identity. It is the invitation to a deeper one. You are not what fell apart. You are what gets rebuilt. This is why the people who rise after failing in silence carry a different aura. They walk differently. Speak differently. See differently. Because they learned something priceless. That the world doesn't give you strength. Your response to difficulty does. And once you realize that, you never fear failure again. You recognize it as a doorway, one you've walked through many times, and one you can walk through again. After rising from failure, a deeper evolution takes place, one that separates those who transform temporarily from those who transform permanently. This is the shift from emotion-driven action to will-driven action. Most people rely on inspiration to move. They wait for the right mood, the right timing, the right spark. And while inspiration feels powerful, it is unreliable. It appears like a sudden gust of wind, strong, intoxicating, but always temporary. Jung believed that will is the force that reorganizes the psyche. Not emotion. Not motivation. Will. Will is the part of you that acts even when your emotions refuse to cooperate. It is the force that turns intention into habit, habit into identity, and identity into destiny. When you rely on inspiration, discipline becomes fragile. When you rely on will, discipline becomes inevitable. There is a moment in everyone's journey where inspiration dies. When the excitement disappears. When the dream loses its initial glow. When the grind becomes repetitive. This is where most people stop. Not because they lack talent, but because they mistake the absence of inspiration for the absence of purpose. Purpose isn't emotional. It's structural. It's the architecture beneath your life. A young athlete once told me, "I used to wait to feel motivated to train. Eventually I realized motivation showed up maybe twice a week, but discipline needed to show up every day." That realization changed him. He stopped negotiating with his emotions and began honoring his commitments over his impulses. He didn't become robotic. He became reliable, to himself. This is what many don't understand. You are not meant to feel inspired every day. You are meant to act every day. Inspiration is a spark. Will is the flame. In Jungian thought, acting without inspiration is a sign that the self, not the ego, is now in control. The ego wants comfort, novelty, praise. The self wants alignment, truth, and consistency. There is a deeper freedom in this stage. When you no longer depend on emotional highs to move forward, you become unstoppable. Not dramatic. Not intense. Just steady. I once worked with a single mother who told me she felt like she had no energy left. She woke before sunrise, worked long shifts, and came home exhausted. For years she said, "One day, I'll find the motivation to start my dream." But motivation never came. Then something shifted. She stopped waiting for emotion and began relying on will. Every night, after her son was asleep, she gave herself just 15 minutes. 15 minutes to read, to plan, to learn, to write. Not because she felt inspired, but because she decided she would not let exhaustion erase her life's direction. A year later, she launched a small online business. Not because she had more time than others, but because she understood something most people never do. Consistent small steps outperform inconsistent bursts of passion. Willpower isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It doesn't make speeches. It whispers, again, on the days you least want to hear it. Jung said, "Freedom of will is the ability to do gladly that which must be done." Gladly doesn't mean joyfully, it means willingly, with a sense of inner acceptance. When you reach this stage, your identity starts to shift. You stop describing yourself by your intentions and start describing yourself by your actions. You no longer say, "I want to become disciplined." You say, "I keep my promises to myself." This is a psychological rebirth. Acting without inspiration is not about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming sovereign over your emotions. You still feel doubt, boredom, fatigue, but you are no longer shaped by them. You move because movement aligns you with who you are becoming. Every significant transformation in your life will require you to act long after the excitement fades. Every dream worth pursuing demands a version of you who shows up whether you feel ready or not. And every powerful person you admire learned the same truth. Inspiration is a visitor. Will is a companion. When you learn to act without waiting for emotional permission, you take control of your trajectory. You step into a level of maturity where consistency is no longer a battle, it becomes your nature. You rise because it is time. You act because it is necessary. You continue because stopping is no longer compatible with who you are. This is the turning point between wishing for change and becoming the change. There comes a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you realize something profound. You've walked through loneliness. You've stopped seeking emotional rescue. You've dropped complaint, validated yourself, risen from failure, and learned to act without inspiration. And now, without warning, you reach the final threshold. The realization that you no longer need anyone to understand you. This is one of the most liberating moments in a person's journey, but it often begins with discomfort. You look around and notice that the people close to you still don't grasp what you're becoming. They see your discipline but not your struggle. They see your consistency but not your doubts. They see your strength but not the cost of building it. And you begin to wonder, why does no one understand me? But what you're truly asking is, why can't anyone see the depth of what I'm carrying? Here is the truth. They can't. Not because you're invisible, but because no one else has lived your inner life. No one else has walked your nights of uncertainty. No one else has carried your thoughts through the quiet hours. No one else has heard the questions you ask yourself in the dark. And no one else has held the version of you that broke and rebuilt in silence. Carl Jung wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you look into your own heart." Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakes? And awakening, by its nature, is a solitary act. The desire to be understood is one of the ego's last attachments. It wants acknowledgement, resonance, recognition. But the self, the deeper, wiser part of you, does not need to be understood. It only needs to be expressed. When you accept that no one will fully understand your inner transformation, you stop performing for the world. You stop trying to convince people of your growth. You stop explaining your choices, your silence, your discipline, your boundaries. Instead, you begin living from a place of inner clarity. Meaning becomes internal. Direction becomes internal. Authority becomes internal. This is the psychological moment Jung called individuation, the point where the individual stops being shaped by the collective and begins shaping themselves. There is a story about a painter who left her city after years of creating art that pleased others but drained her spirit. She retreated to a small lakeside home and painted without the intention of showing anyone. Her work became raw, alive, unfiltered, an honest conversation between her soul and the canvas. When she eventually returned to the art world, her style had transformed so deeply that galleries sought her out immediately. She said, "Only when I stopped begging to be seen did people finally see me." Understanding is a paradox. When you no longer need it, the right people naturally begin to understand you, not through explanations, but through alignment. Not through words, but through presence. You may lose people along the way. Not because you became distant, but because you became authentic. And authenticity has a gravity that only certain souls can hold. Those who cannot meet you where you are will quietly fall away. Those who can will find you without effort. When you no longer require the world to understand you, you become free to understand yourself fully. And that is what you've been searching for from the beginning. Everything you needed, validation, clarity, strength, peace, was never outside. It was waiting within you, behind layers of noise and dependency, waiting for the moment you would finally turn inward. The journey of rising when no one is there is not about becoming invincible. It's about becoming honest. Honest with your fears. Honest with your wounds. Honest with your desires. Honest with the light inside you that was always there, even when you didn't believe it. The person who rises alone does not rise because they feel no pain. They rise because they no longer abandon themselves. And that is the greatest transformation of all. So if you're walking this path now, quietly, steadily, invisibly, know this. You are not behind. You are not lost. You are not unseen. You are becoming. And one day, you will look back at the seasons where you felt most alone and realize they were the seasons that gave birth to your strength, your clarity, and your true self. The world may not know your journey. But you do. And that is enough. If you're ready to continue this path, to grow from within rather than from applause, subscribe, and let this space be a reminder that the journey of becoming yourself has already begun.